All right, guys, so we already looked at drop downs a little bit when we did buttons. I showed you how to create a drop down button, but I want to get a little more into it and show you the different types, different variations, as well as adding a drop down to the nav bar. So we'll start off with a single button. So if you remember, we have a class of drop down, and then inside that we have our button. We're going to give that button, let's say btn dash primary, and also drop down dash toggle, right? And then we also want to add an attribute of data dash bs dash toggle, and we want to set that to drop down. And then what you put in the button is up to you. Let's just say drop down. Okay, so that gives us the actual button. Now for the menu that we want to actually drop down is going to go under the button. We'll have a UL, let's say drop down dash menu, and then we'll have some LIs with an A tag with a class of drop down dash item. And for the link, I'll just say item 1. And we'll copy that down, let's say 2 and 3. And now if I click on that, now that works. So now we're going to do a split button. So we're going to actually wrap this in a BTN group. So it's going to be a button group. And then for the first button here, I'm going to give it a class of BTN and BTN-danger. And we'll just say action. And then underneath that, we're going to have another button. Let's do BTN danger, and this one is going to have the drop down toggle, and we're also going to have a class of drop down dash toggle dash split. And as far as what I want in here is going to be a span with the class of visually hidden. So visually dash hidden, and we'll say toggle drop down. So this is for accessibility. That's not actually going to be displayed to us. Okay, and we just want to add an attribute onto the second button that we added here for not drop down. We want to do, what do we want this? Data dash bs dash toggle, and we want to set that to drop down. All right, now we can take the drop down menu, we'll just copy this UL here, and we can put it under the second button. And now let's save that, and now this is split. So the drop down is on this arrow right here. And then this could be a link to something else. So that's a split button. We can also make our drop downs dark, so I'm just going to copy this one here. And we'll paste that in, and then I'm just going to change right here, or just add a class of drop down dash menu dash dark. So now if I click that, now it's a dark menu. Now you can also have drop ups. So let's just paste in our drop down, except I'm going to actually we want this to have a class of BTN group, and then also a class of drop up. And then let's see, we have our drop down toggle. That should be good. All right, so let's check that out. And let's just change the text here to drop up. And I'll change it to a different color. Let's do BTN dark. And now we have our drop up button. And we can make the menu dark by saying drop down dash menu dark. All right, cool. So as far as nav bars go, I think what I'm going to do is just copy from the navbar HTML file that we have here. So the first one, the simple navbar, I'm going to grab that. And then we'll go in here and paste that in. So if I save that, we can see our navbar, and I'm just going to make it bigger so we can see the actual links. Now to add a drop down, we can just add another LI. So this LI is going to have a class of nav item just like the rest, except it's also going to have a class of dropdown. And then inside there, we're going to have an A tag with a class of nav-link and also a class of dropdown-toggle. And we want to add to this an attribute of data-bs-toggle and set that to dropdown, just like we did with the regular buttons. Okay, and then for the text, I'll just say dropdown. And then let's go underneath that. So right underneath the A tag is where we'll have our menu, and I'll just grab the same UL that we've been using. Except I'm going to get rid of the drop-down menu dark. All right, so now you can see we have this text that says drop-down. If I click it, we have our menu. All right, so the actual HTML and classes aren't really different from the nav bar to just a regular button. And even if I were to make this smaller where we have the hamburger menu, the drop-down still works. Okay, so that's it. In the next video, we're going to look at the accordion and the collapse widgets. Okay, so now we're going to look at the accordion menu and the collapse widget. So the accordion is just, we have these headers that we can click and it will open to see the content. And they're good for like frequently asked questions, stuff like that, Q&A. And then we have collapse, which could be used for anything. So you could basically click on anything to open and close anything else on the page. So we'll start with the accordion, and of course there's specific classes that we need to use, just like with a card or anything, but we also have to use IDs because we need to know which header we click on is going to open which piece of content. Same with collapse. So let's create a class of accordion, and inside here we're going to have a class of accordion-item. And then in the accordion item, I'm going to have an H2 with accordion-header. And in that header, I'm going to have a button. Okay, and that button's going to have a class of accordion-button, not BTN, but button. And we're going to give this an extra attribute of data-bs-toggle, and we're going to set that to collapse. Now we're also going to add another attribute here of data, because we need a target, so data-bs-target, and this is basically the content that we're targeting. It's going to be the ID of that content, so we'll say collapse 1. All right, and then inside the button, we'll just say accordion 1. So this is what we see so far, and it doesn't do anything just yet. We haven't added our content, but let's do that now. So we'll go under the H2. We're still going to be within the item. Okay, everything is wrapped in the item. So under the H2, we're going to have a div with a class of accordion-collapse, as well as collapse, as well as show, because I want this one to show by default. All right, and then we're also going to add an ID onto this. Let's put the ID on the beginning here. So we'll say ID, and we'll set that to collapse 1, because that should match the target. And then we also want to add another attribute onto this div called data BS and then parent. And that parent is going to be set to the ID of the accordion, which I didn't add, but we'll add that in a second. So it's going to be, we actually put the number sign here, and we'll call it my accordion. So let's put an ID onto this accordion of my accordion, so it knows which accordion it belongs to. And then inside that div is where we can put the accordion body, so we're going to have that class. And then in here we can just put our text. Let's do like lorem 30. So I'll save that, and notice it shows by default because of this show. If I get rid of that, then it doesn't. but I'm going to have that show by default. And let's see, it's not collapsing. Just want to see if we're getting any console errors here. Nope. Oh, I think I know the issue. So for the target, we're targeting the ID of collapse 1, so we have to put the number sign in here as well. So now I can open and close it, and you'll see the little arrow moves as well. Now I want more items, so all we have to do is grab the accordion item, which ends right here. So let's see, yeah, we'll grab that. Let's go directly under it, paste that in, and let's make this accordion 2. Now we have to change the target. We'll change that to collapse 2, which means we have to change the ID of the content to collapse 2 as well. And let's take away show, because we just want the first one to show. So I save that, and there we go. So now we have 2 and 1. So let's add one more. So we'll go under that item, paste in another one. That will be accordion 3. We'll change the target to 3 and change the ID to 3, and that's it. So pretty simple. And notice it's only going to show one content at a time. That's how the accordion works. Now let's do a collapse, which works in a similar way. So we're basically just going to have a button that toggles a piece of content. So let's just add, let's see, we'll just wrap this in a class, and I'll do my3, or wrap it in a div rather, with a class of my3, and I'm going to have a button. Let's do btn btn-primary, and I'm going to give this an attribute of data. Let's say data-bs-toggle, and set that to collapse. And then just like we did with the accordion, we need a target. So we're going to say data-bs-target, and we'll set that to an ID of, we'll just say my content. Okay, and then here inside the button, we'll say toggle content. So we have our button. Now, whatever content we want to toggle, we just need to create. Let's put this underneath this div with the my, and it's going to have a class of collapse, and then it also needs an ID of my content, because that's what we want to target right here. And then inside that, what I'll do is just have, we'll just do a card dash body. Of course, this could be absolutely anything you want. And I'll say lorem 30. All right, so now when I save, nothing is showing, right? But when I click this, then it'll show. And I could add the class. Let's see, on this div right here, I could add show, and that will show by default, and then I can close it. But I'm going to keep that to not show by default. So they're very similar. The accordion is just a specific style, which is, again, good for like documentation and frequently asked questions, things like that. And then collapse can be used for absolutely anything. All right, guys, so that's it. Let's move on to the next video where we're going to look at the carousel. All right, guys, so now we're going to create a carousel, which is an image slider, or you could use it for other content as well. But we're going to go ahead and jump right under this comment and create a class or a div with the class of carousel, as well as slide, not Clyde, slide, not slice, but slide. And then I'm also going to add an ID here of, let's call this slider, because we're going to need that later. All right, and then inside here we're going to have a carousel inner, so carousel inner class, and inside carousel inner will be our items. So let's say carousel dash item, and I want this one to be the first one that's shown, so I'm going to give it a class of active as well. Now I'm going to add an image in here, and the link to it is pretty long. It's one of my course images. If you want the exact image I'm using, you can grab it from the finished version, or you can use your own image. So let's go ahead and put an image tag in here. I'm going to paste in the link, which, as I mentioned, is very long. And then we're also going to add a class. I'm going to add two classes. I want it displayed as block, and I want it width 100 of its container. If I save that, we should see the image. So it's my modern JavaScript course image. And then you can also have captions. So right under the image, let's have a div with the class of carousel-caption. And I don't want these to show on small screens on mobile just because it can look cluttered. So I'm going to give it a class of dNone, which will display none. But then on medium screens, so DMD, I want to display as block. And I'll go ahead and put an H5 in there and just say modern JS from the beginning. And then underneath that, I'll just have a paragraph and we'll say lorem 5, just some dummy text. So if I save that, we can't see the caption, but once I hit medium screens, we can see it. And it doesn't look that great. I mean, the image has words in it, so it looks kind of weird, but you probably won't have words in your image, or if you do, you won't have a caption. But I want to show you how you can do both. And you can style this. So for instance, I could do on the caption BG, let's do secondary, and then make it a little opaque. So we could say, I'm sorry, a little translucent. So let's say opacity 50. Or actually, let's do opacity 25. No, I wanted it higher, so 75. So something like that. I mean, it doesn't look very good, but the point of this isn't to make it look good. It's so you know how it works. All right, now I want to add another item. So what I'll do is copy this item, and we'll paste that in. We'll get rid of the active class. That should only be on one item. And then I'm going to grab the other image, which is I believe it's my MERNstack course image. So I'll paste that in. That one's a JPEG. I don't know why I have two different types of images, but that doesn't really matter. And then let's change the title here to MERNstack from scratch. Okay, now if I save that, I'm not going to be able to see that image because basically this one is on top of it. All right, and then for the last image, I'm sorry, the last item, I'll just copy what I just did. And then we'll paste that one in, and I'm just going to grab the image for this, which is the Tailwind course. So we'll paste that in, and then let's just change this to Tailwind from scratch. All right, so now we have all the items. Next thing we want to do is add the previous and next button so we can actually shift them or make them slide. So this is going to go outside of, let's see, we want to put it outside of the item. Actually, we want to put it outside of carousel inner. So that ends right here. Right, so there should be 3 divs between the paragraph and what I'm putting in here now, which are the buttons. So let's add the first one. We're going to say button. I'm going to give it a class of carousel-control-prev because this is going to be the previous button. And for a data attribute here, we want to do data bs-slide. And set that to prev. And then we also want to set the target, so data-bs target. And for that, we want the ID of the carousel, which is slider, I think. Is that what we did? Yeah, so make sure you have the ID of slider because it has to know which carousel it's actually controlling. Now, inside of the button tags, we're going to have 2 spans. So the first one is going to have a class of carousel-control-prev-icon. So it's basically going to be a less than or an arrow, whatever. And then underneath that, just for accessibility, we're going to have a span with the class of visually hidden. So visually-hidden. And then inside that, we'll say previous. Okay, and now you can see we have our button, and if I click it, it'll go back. Even though the JavaScript course is the first one, if I click the back button, it'll go to the last one. So it doesn't just stop, it'll keep going. So I can keep revolving through them. Now for the other button, let's just copy this. Okay, and then we just want to change this. Actually, I can just select that, and that, and change that to next. Okay, and then change this to next. So if I save that, now I have this arrow, and now we can scroll through. Okay, so that's a basic slider. Now we can also add indicator buttons, which are the, the dots or the lines at the bottom, and there'll be however many images you have, that's how many buttons there'll be, and those will go up top. So we're going to go right inside the first div here, and let's just put a comment here and say indicators. Okay, and then we're going to have a div with the class of carousel-indicators, and then each one is going to be a button, and the only class I want on this is active, because this is going to be the, it pertains to the first slide. And then nothing's going to go inside the button tags, but we do want to add a few things in here as an attribute. So one is going to be data BS slide, or slide 2 actually, and that's going to slide to 0. So think of it as like an array. The first one is 0, second one's 1, third one is 2. We want this one to pertain to the first slide. Okay, so that's 0. Then we're going to add a data-bs-target, and that relates to the slider itself. So that's going to be the ID of slider, because that's what I gave this, this carousel. I gave it an ID of slider. All right, so that's the first button. You can see it shows there. It's just a line. And then we'll take this and we'll copy that down twice, except I don't want the active class on the second two. So we can get rid of that. And then the second button is going to go to 1. And then the third one is going to go to 2. If I save that, you can see the first one is white. The other ones are gray. And I can click these, okay, and then take me to whatever one I click on. And even if I move with previous or next, it's going to highlight whichever particular slide I'm on. All right, so that's the basics of the Bootstrap carousel. Okay, so now we're going to look at toasts, which are a type of alert. They're basically lightweight notifications that mimic push notifications on mobile and desktop. Now, usually you would show a toast if the user does something. If they miss a form field or something, you might have it pop up and say, email is required or something like that. Just to kind of mimic that, I'm going to just have a button that we can click to show the toast, because it won't show by default. We actually have to use a little bit of JavaScript to show it. So let's add a button here. So I'm going to have a button with an ID of toast btn, and then a class of btn and btn-primary, and we'll say show toast. Okay, so that's going to be our trigger. Now, underneath the button, we'll create the actual toast. So it's going to have a toast container class around it, and I'm going to position it. Oops. I want to position it fixed, so I'm going to use the class position fixed, then bottom-0, which will push it all the way to the bottom, and then end-0, which will push it all the way to the right, and I'll add a little bit of space around it with p-3. Okay, now inside that is where we want to have our actual toast. The container is basically like for positioning it. So I'll have a class of toast and an ID of, this could be anything. I'm just going to call it my toast. And then inside that, we're going to have a toast body. And I'm also going to, let's see. Yeah, let's make it red. So we'll say text-bg danger. So it'll be like an error toast, but you can put whatever text you want. I'll say hello world. This is a toast message. Okay, now if I save that, we can't see it because, like I said, we have to trigger it through JavaScript. So I'm going to come down here and just add a script tag. And we need to select both the button and the toast. So let's say toast We could call it button or trigger, whatever you want. And then we want to select it. So I'm going to use query selector. And it has an ID of toast btn. Okay, and then we want to bring in the actual toast, which has an ID of my toast. And I'll call this variable just toast. All right, so now we brought those two things in. So let's say if toast trigger, and then we want to basically create an instance of the toast. So we'll call this variable toast bootstrap and set that to bootstrap, which is an object that we have available to us because of this, the bootstrap JavaScript bundle. Okay, and then there's a toast object on that, and then there's a function called get, or a method called get or create instance. Okay, make sure you put uppercase letters where I put them, so that at the beginning of every word. And then pass in our toast, which is this right here. Okay, now, since we have an instance of it, I want to call toast bootstrap.show when this button is triggered, when it's clicked. So let's take that button, or our toast trigger is what I called it in our JavaScript, and let's add an event listener onto it and listen for a click event. When that happens, then we're going to run a function. So I'm just going to use an arrow function. And then we're going to call our toast bootstrap, which is an object that has a show method. And that will show that particular toast. So let's save that and let's click the button. And there we go. Hello world, this is a toast message, and it should go away after a certain amount of time. There we go. It looks like it's about 5 seconds. So what else? You can put a header in the toast if you want. So basically, right above the body, we can say toast dash header, and let's also make it red. So text bg danger, and let's just we'll have a class of me auto, and we'll just say bootstrap, and then we might have some smaller texts. We'll say like 11 minutes ago. And let's click show toast. And there we go. So we have a header. You can see that it has a line here to separate it. So it's up to you on how you want to style it and make it look, but that's it. All right, so now we're going to look at spinners, which you'll typically use if you're like fetching some data, if you're building an application and you want to show something while the page is loading or while the data is being fetched. So they're really easy to implement. We just have a class of spinning dash, or not spinning, spinner dash border. And we'll add a role here of status for accessibility. And we'll also add span with a class of visually hidden. And if I save that, you'll see a black spinner. And that's kind of the default look. Now, if you want to make it a different color, you can do that. So we can do that by adding a text color class. So if we say text primary, it'll make it a blue spinner. And you can use any color, any context. So I'm just going to go ahead and paste those in just so you can see what they look like. All right, so all the different colors. Now there's also a growing spinner. So I'm just going to copy this again. And instead of spinner border, we're going to say spinner grow. So that gives you this type of spinner, which just it kind of grows and scales up. Now, typically you'll want to align these to the center of the page or whatever the container is that you're showing it in. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. One way is to use deflex. So display flex and then justify content to the center and then paste in the spinner. So now you can see that that's in the middle. Now, as far as sizing, there is a small class. So let's go under size here and I'm going to paste that in, and I'm just going to also add to this spinner dash border SM. So you can see that makes it even smaller. There isn't a large one, so if I use LG, you'll see that doesn't work. So if you want it larger, which I probably would, then you just have to add some custom CSS. So for example, I'll paste this in and I'll add style onto this, and then we'll set a height. Let's see, we'll do height 5 rem, width, and set that to 5 rem as well. Okay, so that will make it a little bigger. All right, now you can also put these in buttons. So let's add a button, and we'll do btn primary, and inside the button we'll add a span with the class of spinner dash border, and let's make it small, so spinner dash border dash sm. And next to it, so outside of the span, I'm just going to say loading ... And there we go. So now it's in a button. So if you're submitting a form and you want it in the button instead of, taking up the whole page or whatever, then you could do that as well. All right, so in the next video, we're going to look at modals. All right, so now we're going to look at modals, which I really like. In fact, I think 3 of the 5 website projects we build are going to include modals. It just allows you to have like a light box. So if you click on something like a project and you want to see more info, it'll open a nice light box so you can see more content, and you can put anything you want in it: images, text, forms, whatever. So I have a button here. That's all I have on the page right now. And I want this button to trigger a modal. So the first thing I'm going to do is on the button, I'm going to add data-bs-toggle. So basically, if you haven't caught on to this, whenever we toggle anything, whether it's collapse or the carousel with a slide or a modal, we have this toggle attribute. So we're going to set this one to modal. All right, then we're also going to add a target. That's another common thing. So let's say bs-target, and that's going to include the ID of the modal, which I'll just call my modal. Okay, so that's it for the button. Now we need to create the actual modal, which has a specific set of classes. So it's going to be wrapped in a class of modal. I'm also going to add a class of fade because I want it to have a fade effect. All right, actually, let's add an ID as well. So that's going to be my modal, just like the button is pointing to. We're also going to add, actually, I think that should be good. So in here, let's say modal-dialog. Okay, so the dialog is the actual box. The modal is positioned absolute, and it takes up the whole thing because behind the box is an overlay, a dark overlay. So the dialog is the actual box, and in that dialog we have modal content, and in that we can have a header. So let's say modal dash header, and you don't need to have a header, but you can. Same thing with a footer. So in the header, let's put an h1, and I'm going to give it a class of modal dash title, and I'm going to give it a font size of 5, and let's also give it an ID of my modal label. All right, and I'll just say modal title for the text. You can put whatever you'd like. And we also want a close button, so I'm going to say button, give it a class of btn-close, and we need to add a dismiss in here, so data bs-dismiss, and set that to modal. All right, and let's see, will this work? Yeah, so that's what it looks like so far. Let's see. Did I spell something wrong? I feel like that should be, yeah, right here. So modal header. There we go. So now the header looks much better. So now under the div, under the header, we're going to have the body. So let's say class modal dash body. And I'm just going to put in a bunch of text here. So lorem 30. Okay, so that gives us the body. You can see the header has a border underneath it. And then you can also have a footer if you want. So under the body, let's say modal dash footer. And then in the footer, I'm going to put a button, let's say BTN and BTN dash secondary, and we'll say close, and let's add a data. So anything you add data BS dismiss equals modal will close the modal. You can also close it in your JavaScript. So if you have a form and you're submitting it, you're going to want to close the modal as well. And then we'll put another button next to it, and let's make this one primary. And this one will just say save changes. So now let's open it up. What did I mess up here? BTN. And there we go. So now we have a cool looking modal. You can see the background has that dark overlay. And like I said, well, our projects are going to have modals, and we're going to put a lot more into it than just a little paragraph. But again, these first few sections are just to show you the class names and just how things work. Okay, so in this video, we're going to look at popovers and tooltips, which are pretty similar. A popover is a small overlay that appears when you click on an element, and a tooltip is smaller than a popover, and it's usually on hover, when you hover over like a link or something like that. And both of these are available to us because of the Popper.js library, and that's actually included in this Bootstrap bundle JavaScript. So if you don't use the bundle and you use just the Bootstrap.js, then you also have to include the Popper.js file to be able to use these. And another thing that I want to mention is you do have to initialize them in your JavaScript, but it's basically just a single line of code. So really easy. So let's start with the popover. I'm going to use a button. So I'll say button class BTN, we'll do red, danger, and then let's make it large. So BTN LG, and I'm also going to give it an ID of popover. And inside here, we'll say toggle popover. Now, as far as the content of the popover, it actually goes in attributes. So we're going to say data. Well, first of all, we need to do our toggle. So data BS toggle, and that's going to be a popover. And then I'm going to go under that and say data dash BS dash title, and I'll say popover title. And then under that, we'll say data BS content, and I'll set that to, we'll say this is the popover content. Okay, it's as easy as that. Now, it's not going to work just yet because, like I said, we do have to initialize it. So I'm going to go under the script here and add a new set of script tags. And I need to grab that popover. So I'm going to create a variable called popover L for popover element. And then I'll use document dot and then get element by ID. And it has an ID of popover. So I got the element. Now what I have to do is just initialize it, and I can create a variable called popover and say new, and then bootstrap, which I have access to this object because I included the Bootstrap JavaScript. And then we're going to say dot popover with an uppercase P. And then we just need to pop in our popper element. Okay, so now let's save that. Let's click. Okay, it still didn't do anything. Let's see if we have any. Popper L is not. I said popper. Pop over. Okay, so now if I click that, it shows the popover, which has a heading and content. Now a tooltip is a little different. It's much smaller than this. It doesn't have like the whole header and rounded corners and the little arrow and stuff like that. So let's create a tooltip. And basically I'm just going to have a paragraph, and let's put some text in here. I'll say lorem 30, and then I'm just going to surround some of this text. The href doesn't matter because the tooltip shows on hover. And I'll just put some text in here that says tooltip 1. All right, and then let's add in here, right in the A tag, we're going to say data dash BS toggle and set that to tooltip. And then as far as the content goes, that's going to go in data-bs-title, just like the popover. And I'll say tooltip 1. And then we'll add another one, so I'll just copy that, paste that in here. Let's call this tooltip 2 and change this text to tooltip 2. All right, so we'll save that, and now if I hover over one of these links, it's not going to do anything because, again, we have to initialize it. Now, this JavaScript is going to be a little more complicated, and if you don't understand it, that's absolutely fine. This is not a JavaScript course. But the reason it's more complicated is because we have more than one tooltip. So we have to select more than one and basically loop through and initialize each one. So we're going to use the map high order array function for that. So first off, let's select, let's say, tooltip trigger list. So we're creating a variable here, and we're going to set it to document dot, and we're going to use query selector all since there's more than one tooltip. And we're going to select it by the data attribute, which is this right here, data bs toggle equals tooltip. So that's going to go right in here. So that'll select the triggers, right? Now we want to create a variable called tooltip list, and we're going to set that to an array, and we're going to spread across. These three dots are called the spread operator. We want to spread across the trigger list, and we want to map through it, which is kind of like looping through it, except we're going to do something with what we're looping through. So that's going to take in a function, and I'm going to use an arrow function. And in here, we can call this whatever we want. I'm going to call it tooltip trigger L for element, EL. Okay, and then what we're going to do is initialize now, just like we did with the popover. We're going to initialize new bootstrap dot and then tooltip, and then we're going to pass in that tooltip trigger element. And now if I hover over one, okay, that's still not working. Let's see. Bootstrap is not bootstrap. Bootstrap. Nope, still not right. Bootstrap. All right, so now if I hover over, you can see tooltip 1, tooltip 2. So basically, we're just selecting all of the tooltips and mapping through and initializing for each one. Here, we just had one popover, so we simply selected that one element with get element by ID, and then we initialized that one popover element. All right, so that's it. We have our tooltips and we have our popover. And again, these are, we're able to use these because of the popper.js library that's included in the Bootstrap bundle. All right, guys, so we looked at dark mode, and I showed you that you just had to put the attribute onto the HTML element right here for the theme. So data-bs-theme equals dark. However, in this video, I want to show you how you can toggle dark mode and light mode, because that's kind of a popular thing to integrate into your websites. Now, the JavaScript for this is way beyond this course. So I actually included that file, and it's JavaScript directly from the Bootstrap documentation. But you can see I have a folder called assets, and then in JS there's a dark mode toggle.js. So this is right from the Bootstrap docs, and basically what this does is it sets it to dark to begin with initially, and then what it will do is allow us to change the theme by creating a button and adding an attribute of data-bs-theme-value. And then we'll be able to change the mode to light or dark. And it's also going to save it in local storage. So down here, let's see, so we set the theme and we toggle this attribute data-bs-theme-value, and then it sets it to local storage so that next time you come to the website, it remembers what you liked, if you liked dark mode or light mode. All right, so what I've done here in this HTML file is just included that JavaScript file. That's why it's automatically in dark mode. So before we create the buttons to toggle it, let's just create a card so at least we have something else on the page. So I'm just going to create a card class, and let's give it a width as well. We'll just say style, set that to width to 18 rem. And then in the card, we'll have a card header. And I don't know, this is a card. And then we'll have a card body and just say lorem 20. All right, so at least we have something on the page. Now, under that, we're going to put our buttons. Let's see, let's actually put a MB4 here. And then we'll create our button. So let's make this a dark button, so btn-dark. And let's see, all we have to do for this to work, first of all, let's put some text in here. We'll say enable dark mode. Okay, and what we have to do is have a data attribute, so data-bs-theme-value, and we want to set that, in this case, to dark. All right, and then I'm going to copy this, and we'll have another button. Let's make this one btn light, and we're going to change this to light, and we'll say enable light mode. So now if I click enable light mode, it should change. Enable dark mode. So now you can implement this into any website that you create. And it should have also saved it in local storage. So if I open up my DevTools and I go to the application tab and you go down to local storage, you should see here, you'll see theme light. If I change it to dark, that gets changed to dark. And even if I close the browser or go to another site or close the tab, when I come back, it's going to remember the mode that I'm in because of this local storage value. Okay, thanks to that JavaScript file. So I just wanted to show you guys this because I think it's useful, and I think you can use it in future projects. So what we're going to do now that we're done with the sandbox is we're going to create a couple small projects just to kind of get your feet wet in creating something, and then we'll jump into our 5 websites.